Good morning. I'm Kim McClary, President and CEO of the Los Angeles World Affairs Council and Town Hall. Thank you all so very much for joining us. We have launched our annual year-end giving campaign that will continue through December. As a small nonprofit, we depend upon the support of our viewers to raise money to cover our operations and these live streams. Since the pandemic hit in March, we pivoted from our usual in-person events to these live streams, which we offer for free. So please stay tuned to the end of this program to find out how you can contribute. My staff and I greatly appreciate your support. For today's program, if you would like to submit questions to the panel, there's a control panel on the right-hand side of your screen where you can type in your questions. Jessica DeGanzik, our Vice President of Events, will be managing your questions during the Q&A portion of today's program, which will start in about 20 or 25 minutes. We are very fortunate to have a terrific moderator today, Lisa Daftari. She is an investigative journalist who focuses on international affairs with a specialty on Middle Eastern policy and counterterrorism. Lisa, we are so appreciative that you are here today to moderate this program, and I also appreciate that you will be introducing today's panelists. We look forward to an excellent conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. I'd like to begin by introducing our esteemed panelists for today's discussion. First, Marjan Keypour Greenblatt, founder and director of the Alliance for Rights of All Minorities, a network of activists promoting human rights in Iran. Second, we have Khansarinia, Policy Director for the National Union for Democracy in Iran, a nonpartisan nonprofit organization of Iranian-Americans raising awareness about the freedom movement in Iran. And last but not least, we have Arash Sobhani, an Iranian musician, television host, and activist. He is the lead singer and guitarist of underground rock band Kiosk and the host of OnTen, a satirical news program that airs on Voice of America Persian. And I'd like to welcome all of you to the Iran and the Future Generation of Activism panel. I want to welcome members of our audience and welcome our panelists. These are the silent warriors who have dedicated their lives not just to exposing a brutal, violent, baseless Iranian regime, but also serving as the voice and vessel of those freedom-fighting Iranians who are silenced and threatened and cannot do the same for themselves. What we hope to accomplish in the next hour or so is to engage in an informal conversation to give viewers a glimpse into the history, the evolution, and the future of activism in Iran by Iranians and the expatriate Iranians like these panelists who do that for them and support them as well. It's no coincidence that we're hosting this panel this week, which coincides with the 1-year anniversary of the Aban protests, also known as Bloody November. If you recall, last year on November 15th started a very, very, very violent and brutal crackdowns on protesters who came out onto the streets for about 6 days. They initially came out to protest the exponential rise in oil prices, but that quickly changed to an all-out call for the ouster of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. What was different about last year's protests? Well, they were a departure from the 2009 Green Revolution, in which we saw mostly millennials, university students, young people come out in major cities in Iran, like Tehran. This time we saw people all over Iran, urban, rural, young and old, poor and rich, educated and not, come out to show us that they are more unified than ever before in 40 years. What else was different? This was the most violent of the, or I should say, the most, we saw the most violence from the opposition. They burned flags, they burned pictures, pictures of the supreme leader. They burned the apparatus of the regime. What did that tell us? That they are willing now to risk more than ever before, to go further than ever before in their endeavor. And what did we learn from all these protests last year? That the 40-year opposition, the activists, they have a rich history of their own that warrants sharing. And that's what we hope to do today. And with that, I want to start with the history of the history of activism over the last 40 years. And I want to start with you, Arash. Can you walk us through the evolution of this movement? How has it changed? How has it stayed the same? How did we arrive to where we are today?
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for having me on this panel, and I say hi to all the attendees and the wonderful panelists. You know, it's an interesting question that I think every Iranian asks themselves every morning they wake up. What happened, and how did it happen? How did we get here? Well, you know, it's obvious that after the what happened in 1979, quickly after that came the war, which silenced a lot of opposition groups. You know, they were all forced to shut up and just follow what the policies of the government was, because the country was at war. And meanwhile, we lost a lot of you know, important figures in the opposition. You know, there were terror groups who came to Europe and America and assassinated these key figures. And then after the war, there was a new generation of Iranians coming about, and they wanted to see some change. There was no excuse to have that oppression on the society, so the government tried to maneuver over this demand by the people by you know, bringing about the so-called reforms. And so another 8 years and another 16 years basically went by, and then we had Ahmadinejad. And during this time, what happened was that people of Iran who wanted change so badly, but they also were fearful of what had happened in '79, didn't want to experience again another violent change. They went and experienced, you know, they exhausted all the options they had with the regime. They participated in all the elections. They supported all the right figures that they thought are going to stand up to the regime and bring about change. And unfortunately, it was just another setup by the government to control the society. And where we are today is the result of the failure, or I should say, the reformist betrayal of the people's hopes and dreams, and Islamic republics, the nature of not complying to anything that has any of the demands that comes from the society. You know, this regime in its DNA is a dictatorship. It's a totalitarian dictatorship that does not allow for any change, doesn't have any room for any flexibility. It cannot be reformed. And this is where we are today, where the young generation, with the shift in the demographic that we've seen in the last 5 years, are tired of these, you know, same games with the elections and what have you, and they want meaningful, real, fundamental change. In the constitution of this regime, there is no room for that. So I don't see any other way. That it's just a fight that we have to keep pushing, and people in Iran are doing a great job, and hopefully we'll see the change coming soon.
And to parallel that, Arash, I want to continue with you. How has the expatriate activism, how has that evolved over the last 40 years? You have some people who have been out for 40 years. You have people, you know, like myself, who were born in the United States, but that are covering this and are, you know, pushing for change. We also have people who are, you know, out only a few years from Iran. I mean, can you give us maybe some qualitative and quantitative analysis about the expatriate community? What are they doing, and how have they evolved over the last 40 years?
You know, it's just my own observations and my own experiences of traveling around, you know, touring with my band, meeting up these new people and groups and activists all the time, being in contact with them. I feel that there was in the expats as well this hope that there could be a change in how the regime runs the country through ballots and elections. But I think today we all know that it's not going to happen, and I think that has changed a lot. A lot of these activists, a lot of these groups have given up hope into creating any kind of dialogue at any level with the regime, and you know, hoping for any kind of change. But unfortunately, I mean, what bothers me personally is I feel that we as expatriates, we as Iranians dissidents, we haven't done enough to inform the world what's going on inside Iran and how brutal this regime is. We have I think, you know, again, it's my personal disappointment to us that we haven't brought together the resources that we have. We have between 5 to 8 million Iranians living outside Iran. It's a huge number. It's a country with itself. To support our brothers and sisters inside the country. So, but we are seeing a big change in the activists, in the groups, in the political groups that have been outside Iran, to just realize and come to the conclusion that there's no other way but a regime change in Iran.
You know, Marjan, I want to come to you next. You know, Arash depicts probably, I would say, an accurate picture, but one that is not filled with too much hope for, you know, what's been done over the last 40 years, both inside and outside the country. But I think one of the areas of your coverage is the women of Iran, and I think that is an area where we've seen a lot of hope. We've seen, you know, the courage in women grow. I mean, they've come out taking off their hijabs. They've become, you know, the faces of this movement. Can you talk to that a bit about the women of Iran, how they've evolved, and you know, where they stand today?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa, for including me on this panel, and thanks to the LA World Affairs Council and Town Hall for hosting these informative and educational events. Arash really painted the baseline of what we have been dealing with very well. And what I would add to that is that in terms of the activities of women and the role of women in the movement, women have always been present in the social movement and engaging in acts of civil disobedience in Iran. And even though the Iranian regime has tried from the beginning to silence women, to put women under the hijab, and to suppress women with a variety of roles and with a variety of impositions, the women have resisted these impositions. They have resisted these oppressions, and they have come to the surface courageously and bravely, intelligently, and at times even colorfully. What we have seen, the difference that we are seeing now in the particular role of women versus, let's say, even, you know, a couple of years ago, is the dominance of mothers who are now active in this scene of civil disobedience. Mothers of all social backgrounds and of all religious practice. This is no longer a movement of women who just want to lift their hijabs and have freedom to celebrate, to dance, and to sing, or to be happy. Right now, mothers who are grieving are struggling for the right to grieve and mourn their sons. In a country that is, I don't want to say celebrate, but embraces wholeheartedly any act of mourning for prophets and for you know, historic figures of the past, religious figures of the past. Right now, mothers are suppressed to the point where they have no right to honor and to mourn and to cry for the sons that have been killed in the hands of the regime. And these moms, the struggle and the anger and the sadness that they're feeling is so immense, and it's not going to be suppressible. And what will happen, it's going to be dark, but it's always dark before it gets light. And even though right now we are experiencing this period of darkness in the sphere of Iranian civil disobedience, with all the killings, with all the ruthlessness, with all the acts of cruelty, but we are seeing this brave movement of women who are wearing the hijab, who are not wearing the hijab, women who are mothers, who have lost a son, a daughter, a husband, in one way or another, women and men who are sick and tired of unfulfilled promises. And that is going to motivate and propel the country, hopefully, to a more hopeful future.
You know, just to follow up, I mean, because you cover so many different groups, how did we get to a place where religious people are fed up with the government than they were, previously, obviously, part of the constituency that supported the government from 1979 forward. How did we get to a place where the actual hashtag for the demonstrations is that these demonstrations are across Iran, meaning the goal of the activists is to tell the international community that we're not just, Tehran millennials. We're not just men. We're not just, the seculars. It's everyone. How did it evolve to that place?
I think it's been a series of unfulfilled promises, and also, to every action there is an equal or greater reaction. This is a regime that prides itself on its religious values and on its Islamic morals. And it has been teaching this values, this moral and this religion to people of all faiths. By the way, I myself, I'm Jewish, and I was trained to read the Quran and I have learned the essence of Islam, and I think it's a great thing for everyone to know about all the religions. But what everyone is noticing sooner or later is that the behavior of the regime is not morally acceptable. It is not religiously acceptable. And what they have been taught, what the moral code of Islam has taught these the country is actually different from the lack of compassion, lack of mercy on the people that they are governing. And sure, they are obeying all the rules. They are going by all the requirements to wear the hijab, to be separated from from males in this in different spheres of whether it is public service or work or other things. Nonetheless, they are not receiving dignity, and dignity is the essence of humanity. And there's no moral justification for taking away someone's dignity. And right now, based on my observations, not only people are turning away from Islam, they're turning away from religion altogether in Iran. There is a movement toward, not just secularism, but anti-religion movement. And it's really baffling, and I would be very disappointed if I wanted to create a country that is based on a religious foundation, and I'm saying that as a result of my actions, people are actually turning away from religion altogether. It is a huge disappointment.
Yeah, you actually touched upon my next question as to how did we get to such a place where, religion is so, they're turning from religion, and I think you nailed it. It's the hypocrisy that turns everyone away from the government. And Cameron, to further this conversation about these new age activists, we can talk about, dancers and, Instagram celebrities and poets and people who post on their Facebook page, and of course, athletes. And it brings me to the case of Navid Afkari, the 27-year-old wrestler whose face became the real icon of this movement. Recently, he was executed. And why was he executed? Because he attended a real peaceful protest. And, they obviously forced him into a confession and executed him, despite the fact that this case had so much international outcry. It had, groups, human rights groups, NGOs, a union of 85,000 international athletes called for his release, and nonetheless, he was still executed. I want to read a quote Amnesty International released, in which Afkari said, "If I am executed, I want you to know that an innocent person, even though he tried and fought with all his strength to be heard, was executed." It doesn't matter, where you live, who you are. When you hear this is a human being who is young and had his entire future ahead of him, and he was executed by a brutal regime who wanted to make a symbol out of him. And Cameron, I want to turn to you and say, how is it that some of these cases that get all this international attention, and it's only some of the cases, there are many that we don't even hear about that are executed, but why is this pick and choose? How do some of them get released and then some of them become a symbolic execution, like the case of Navid?
Well, as my fellow panelists said, thank you, Lisa, for being our moderator today. Thank you for the LA World Affairs Council for hosting us, and it's a privilege to be next to these two excellent panelists. Your question is a very good one, and it goes back to what Arash referenced, which is really the poisonous nature of the DNA of this regime. You mentioned that Navid was executed for partaking in a protest. It's even more sinister than that. So he attended the protest along with his two brothers. Weeks later, he was identified by some sort of technology. Security forces identified him. They broke into his home where his elderly mother was. They arrested him and they held him for 1 year under significant torture, and they finally killed him. So the point of executing Navid Afkari was to tell other Iranians, if you go to the streets, if you protest, if you call for the downfall of the Islamic Republic, we will do everything to find you and kill you, even if we don't kill you in the street, as they did in the ARAM protests that you referenced, in which the most cited number of those killed, really massacred, is 1,500, although this week research has come out of Europe saying it could be as high as 8,000 were killed. If we don't kill you in the streets, we'll find you after and kill you. We'll even kill you, even if the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN are all talking about you. As the founder of this regime said, America can't do a damn thing. That's their point. That's their point. What they don't realize, actually, is that this will backfire. To Arash's point and to Marjan's point, this will backfire. People will not live under a brutal regime for this long, especially one that bases itself, quote unquote, on moral principles. So that's their goal, is to scare people, but it won't work. The Iranian people have 2,500 years of illustrious civilization. I mean, they have invented some of the things that our world, sort of circles on today: mathematics, I mean, amazing arts, music, poetry. Iranians are people that love life. We celebrate life. Our holiday Nowruz is about rebirth and revival. This regime is a regime that celebrates death. It celebrates killing. It celebrates execution. And so this regime really is an un-Iranian and anti-Iranian regime. It is more of an occupying force than a government. And we all know the fates of occupying forces. They never last forever.
I just want to say, Marjan is going to hook up to power and come right back. So we didn't lose a panelist. We're going to get her right back. Thank you, Cameron, for that. I want to follow up to say, it seems like, the case of Navid being depicted like that in the mainstream media, internationally. How do we get more coverage like that for the opposition in Iran? And more to all of the panelists' point, it seems like we're at a tipping point, right? You've all basically explained in your own ways and with your own areas of expertise how we've gotten to a place where the Iranian people are fed up. There's no going backwards, there's only going forwards. So to go forward, Cameron, I'm going to turn this question to you. Arash even alluded to the fact that the expatriate Iranian opposition, as well as the opposition inside Iran, has not had the proper tools in order to carry this, again, forward. What would be, to you, that magical wish list that both the opposition inside and outside Iran would have if they want to take this forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll preface it by saying one thing that we need to do, and this falls on those of us who are outside the country, is properly introduce the Islamic Republic to a Western audience. Too often, because of some of the people that were mentioned by Arash and by Marjan, these reformists. You have people like Javad Zarif, who is called the foreign minister of the government. We have elections in Iran coming up in the month of June. We need to call all of these things what they are, and we need to start calling a spade a spade. The quote-unquote elections that will be held in June in Iran are not elections. It's a selection from a sort of reviewed list of candidates in which all non-male Shiites are crossed off the list. And then even when you get down to these, a few clerics or mullahs that you're choosing between, even then the people's vote doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, whatever Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei says goes. So there are people like Javad Zarif who provide a nice smiling face to this regime in the foreign press, and they're feted by groups like the Council on Foreign Relations. The New York Times will write a really lovely piece about them every now and then. What we need to do a better job of is take what the Iranian people give us and what they say. They're living under this regime. And one of the most popular chants during the protests in Aban and the ones we saw in January, the people chant, Islamic Republic, you are our ISIS. So this is not a legitimate government. To the Iranian people, this is ISIS. I mean, would the Council on Foreign Relations, would the New York Times, would CNN fet and give an open platform to heads of ISIS? If this was the 1940s, would we be inviting Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels and these people to give unchallenged interviews and give them a platform to say whatever they want? If this were the 1980s and 1990s, would we be inviting representatives of the apartheid regime in South Africa to have a tribune and to have a platform and not challenge them? So a big part of the onus is on us. And I think Arash is right. We haven't done a good job of it, but we're getting much better. You're seeing a lot of people come together who may have different political views abroad. They may have different views of what specifically the future free Iran looks like, but they're all on the same page about needing to sort of show the true face of this regime. Despite these fake elections, despite their fake foreign minister, they're not a legitimate government. As I said, they're an occupying regime. And that's what the Iranian people say. And so it's our job to share their voice, because they don't have access to free media. When they do speak in the media, they're routinely arrested and tortured and even executed inside Iran. So we're getting much better about it. To specifically answer your question, we need to be more active in Washington, D.C. That's in fact why I moved to Washington to do that, to work with, as I said, folks across the aisle. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit group looking to bring as much pressure on elected officials and on the media as we can to try and share the voice of the Iranian people. And I want to clarify one thing when we say support for people in Iran, especially after the wars we've seen the last decade in Iraq and Afghanistan. When we say support for democracy or human rights, many people sort of immediately jump back and think we're talking, foreign-led regime change. That's not what we're talking about. We should be absolutely clear. Nobody wants that. The people of Iran will decide their own future. So when we say support the democratic movement of the Iranian people, we're talking about some basic things. For example, providing internet. One of the reasons that the regime was able to massacre so many people in Aban in November was because they switched off the internet. And I want to be clear for the people joining us as guests. I mean, that's not saying they slowed it down or they censored a few apps like they may do in China or elsewhere. They literally shut off internet. I mean, imagine you can't go on Instagram, Twitter, check your email, Yelp for a restaurant review. You can't do anything for days because they shut off the internet. That's what they do. So when we say support, this is one of the things we push, for example, American officials on, is very basic things like that. If we can provide the Iranian people a safe and reliable source of internet, if we can provide things like a strike fund so laborers and labor unions who want to engage in nationwide labor strikes can do so, that's the type of support we're talking about. And to Arash's point, those of us abroad, I think we're getting much better about it. I think in the coming months, you'll see much more unity. In the past, actually 2 months, I think you've seen an immense amount of unity within the Iranian opposition at home and abroad after a really sort of landmark speech by Prince Reza Pahlavi, who's the leader of the secular democratic opposition, saying whatever your basically history is, whatever your views in the future are, if you believe in a secular democratic Iran, the time to work together is now. And we don't have time to talk about our differences, only what brings us together. And I think in the future, you'll see more and more signs of that growing unity.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched upon, a lot of that fake news, a lot of the social media. Arash, I want to turn to you and say, we'd be remiss if we had this conversation without talking about the role of social media. not just in organizing the activists on the ground, not only in telling the news, not only in using it offensively, but using it defensively. Watching as Khamenei and Zarif get on their platforms and spew this propaganda, fake news, and shut down the internet for the rest of the Iranians. I mean, how can the Iranians, both inside and outside, and others who want to support this movement, make better use of social media, and maybe talk a bit about the role that it has played thus far?
Yeah, I think some of the points that Cameron touched on was really important, and the fact that this regime is an occupying force. If we all can look at it this way, well, a lot of things will make sense, and a lot of things will come to light, and I appreciate that Cameron used that word, because it's something that a lot of activists are kind of concerned when it comes to that. One other thing I wanted to add to what Cameron said, when it comes to media, of course, Islamic Republic has been investing in this for 15 years or so. It's not just New York Times or CNN. They have people everywhere. They have people in academia. They have people in organizations, human rights organizations even, and they've been able to help this illusion that the Western politicians have been playing with for the last 40 years, that there is a moderate sect inside this regime, that we're going to find them and make deals with them, and things are going to change better, and things are going to change slowly. Well, good luck with that. If you can find a Bigfoot and take a picture, you'll be able to find a moderate Islamic authority or official inside this regime. They've been controlling the media for the last 40 years, and that's how it's been. And especially in the last 15 years, with the satellite and all these new Persian networks that's been coming up, they've been able to infiltrate these networks. They've been able to put the people and the mindset, and as one of the American strategies pointed out, to create the echo chambers, to just say whatever happens inside Tehran, just being repeated by CNN, and to brainwash all the Westerners who are not familiar with what's going on in Iran. And I think the good example that we should, and Conrad touched on that as well, is South Africa in the 80s. How the artists, how the athletes, how the celebrities came together in the West to raise awareness and make sure that the politicians who are dealing with these guys know that there's going to be consequences by the constituents if they start supporting South Africa and apartheid. Social media in particular, very quickly the Islamic Republic realized that its strength and how it can mobilize people, how it can become a voice, like the case of Daftari, how it helped to get his voice out there. And they started to create their own defensive and offensive strategies, copying the Russian and Chinese models, creating all these so-called opposition accounts, which are not opposition, they're just trying to create a more divide between the opposition groups and stop us from coming together. And they've been successful to some extent in doing so, but at the same time, we are witnessing more and more younger Iranians coming on Twitter, especially because Twitter is very content-based, and it's important because you can influence journalists, you can talk to policymakers in there. You can't do that on Instagram as much or Facebook. I'm not saying they're not as important, but I'm saying Twitter is a good indicator that we are witnessing a lot of younger Iranians, and as Marjan said, they have hashtags anti-Islam, anti-religion. And it's really growing fast and rapidly, and it's still tricky because we're dealing with a brutal regime to organize these individuals who each have their own circles and circle influence. And I think social media will play a huge role in the future of the protests inside Iran, but it's not everything. And we should also think about fighting back in the media, fighting back in the Iranian TV networks, and then have a presence there and try to be a voice of these people. Again, Kamal touched on a very important point. Fatemeh Sepehri, who's an amazing woman, very brave, and inside Iran, and she came on TV. She said it. what I expect you guys to do outside is to be our voice. And that's the question that comes back to us every morning. We should ask ourselves, how can we help? I hope I answered some of your.
Yeah, absolutely. And Marjan, I want to continue with that. Speaking of voices and amplifying voices, there are so many of these non-governmental groups, that are dedicated to being the voice of the Iranian people. Some of them have great intentions, and some of them have other intentions. They have the intention of apologizing for, appeasing with, defending the Iranian regime right here in the United States, having, the eyes and ears of lawmakers in Washington, and telling a very different story about what's going on in Iran. How can we basically filter through these groups? How do we know which group, which acronymed group is for the Iranian people and which one is working against them and for the government? Marjan, this question goes to you.
Sorry. It is such an important question, and it is a very consequential question, especially as we begin a new administration in America. And I think with all the alphabet of organizations and experts and pundits and scholars and others who, who are going to bubble to the surface with an opinion to offer, it will be really important to tell the difference between the organizations that are speaking on behalf of the Iranian people versus the other ones who are speaking on behalf of the Iranian regime. How do we tell them apart? I think there are definitely some agendas that the organizations that support the Iranian regime have in mind. And they have, their narratives are narratives that you have been hearing all along. I'm not going to get into the specifics, but the narratives are very familiar narratives that because of America and because of the countries on the outside, the Iranian people are suffering. And it dissolves, it basically relieves the responsibility of the Iranian regime from the experiences of suffering and misery that the people are experiencing. So number one, they blame America and they blame the outsiders, and they do not blame the Iranian regime for its own shortcomings. Number two, they are instead of improving the country and suggesting ways to improve the life and livelihood of Iranians inside the country, they want to create a pathway for the Iranians of a certain class to come to America or other places abroad in order to seek a better life. And the argument that should be made to them is, how can we improve lives of all the Iranians inside Iran so they don't need to flee their homeland like me and others, to be in exile and to have to deal with life outside. Number three, typical comments that they would say is that if you interfere too much with the inside domestic issues of Iran and with their national security questions, you are endangering the lives of Iranians even further. And the answer to that is that lives of Iranians has been in jeopardy for a long time, with or without interventionist policies of America or the outsiders. And at some point, we Americans have to ask ourselves our moral question, and examine our own moral standards, and to see to what extent do we want to see people are suffering and just turn the blind eye and create justifications of, an inferior culture or their own heritage to explain why there is execution, why there is femicide, why there is apartheid, and all kinds of other crimes happening against the Iranian people. And the last thing I would add is that unfortunately, what is happening in this system of media and social media is that, especially with Twitter coming to the surface, and I am a frequent user of Twitter. The attention span of the users has become extremely, extremely short. And we can handle one foreign name at a time. And the foreign name that a lot of people like to repeat, and it should be repeated, and it should be, people should be asking for justice, is Jamal Khashoggi. But people are stopping at Jamal Khashoggi, and they are not learning the names of Puya Bakhtiari, Sattar Beheshti, Navid Afkari. These names, and there are hundreds of names that come out probably every month out of Iran, and we do not have the capacity or the bandwidth to remember these names. And maybe what we need to do more of are videos and narratives, like what Masih Ali-Nejad is doing with the Pesaram ro injo koshtan campaign, they killed my son right here campaign that she has begun. Maybe that's something we need to do, because right now there is no bandwidth for these foreign names, and our people are being ignored, unfortunately.
That's great points that you make. Unfortunately, we are out of time for this portion of the hearing from the panelists, and it's unfortunate because I know we were just getting started. But I'd like to invite back in from the Los Angeles World Affairs Council, Jessica Duganzik, who will bring us questions from the audience, and hopefully we'll get more insight from our panelists that way.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and it's great to see you online. I know we got to see you often at our in-person events, so great to connect with you again. Our first question, and it doesn't say which panelist it's for, so feel free to jump in. Has JCPOA helped the activist cause? Has a US withdrawal from it and imposition of sanctions helped or hurt? I don't know who wants to answer that question.
Is it easier if I just field them to different experts? I think Cameron can take this one, yes?
Yeah, I can go first, but thank you, Jessica, and thank you to the guest for the question. I just wanted, actually, I'll connect this to something I wanted to add previously on the tail of what Marjan said, which, by the way, was spot on. I think when you're looking at, or when you're hearing from, if you turn on CNN or whatever it is tomorrow, if you open a newspaper and you see something from an Iran analyst or an Iran expert or an Iran scholar, whomever it may be, you should look at that person's view. And if you have the chance to interact with them, be it on Twitter or elsewhere, you just need to ask them one question. And depending on which answer they give, you'll know whether you can trust that person's judgment and whether it's good analysis or whether they're promoting sort of some subversive, basically, ideas and promoting the regime. Do you think the Islamic Republic should go? Yes or no? That's it. That's the only question you have to ask. If the answer is well or oh or you don't listen to that person's opinion. I mean, again, I use these historical examples. If you ask someone 70 years ago, 80 years ago, should the Nazis go? Well, it's complicated, or what's the alternative? Not a good answer. Yes, the Nazis should go. Well, should the apartheid regime in South Africa go? Well, it's tough. I'm not really sure, and they've done some good things. No. So that's the question you ask someone. That's the question you pose to your Iran analysts or experts. If they waffle, if they can't give you a straight yes, it's not even worth continuing the conversation. Unfollow them on Twitter. Don't read their articles. Don't watch them on TV. If someone says yes, here's what I'm thinking about the future, then that's someone you can have a dialogue with. So I just wanted to add that to Marjan's excellent answer to your question, Lisa. And to our guest's question, the JCPOA was sort of sold to the Iranian people, one, and then to those of us abroad as something that was, I won't get into the national security implications because I'm not a national security expert, but the fact that already the Islamic Republic can buy weapons again, the sale of weapons ban has expired, shows that, in terms of national security, it was a total failure as well. But more importantly to the impact on the Iranian people, this was sold as something that was going to sort of return money, investment, cash to Iran that would get to the Iranian people, that would raise their standard of living. Many people at the get-go wisely knew that that was never going to happen. That the money was going to, as it has for the past 40 years, go into the pockets of the clerics, go into the pockets of the IRGC, which is a sanctioned terrorist organization, by the way. That's where the money was going to go, and that's exactly what happened. not only did it go into the pockets of the clerics, that money is literally being used to finance the bullets, the tanks, the rockets that are responsible for the slaughter, for the genocide of the Syrian people. That's where the money went. That money is being used to kill civilians in Lebanon by Hezbollah, that is directly supported by the Islamic Republic. It's being used in Yemen to kill civilians there, in Iraq to kill civilians there, to kill American soldiers there. So that's the result of the JCPOA. It did not help the Iranian people, it helped the regime. And so pulling out of the deal and putting pressure on the Islamic Republic was absolutely necessary. Iranian people wanted the regime to be pressured. What we'll continue to push for is that in addition to maximum pressure, you have maximum support. So not only do you pressure the regime, you support the people. And this is what I referred to earlier, the internet, ensuring that the Islamic Republic's assassins, which have been so effective in murdering people across the globe, are not allowed into the countries, ensuring that these sham diplomats are not allowed into foreign countries. So this is sort of a narrative that's pushed by the Islamic Republic, that the JCPOA was great for the Iranian people. It was not. That is a lie. What will be good for the Iranian people is a secular, democratic, elected government, not an Islamic Republic, even if it's led by a fake reformist, because we've had reformists before, and they continue to slaughter people, and they continue to deprive them of any economic opportunity whatsoever, and they'll do it again.
Thank you, Cameron. Marjan, this next question is for you. As Iranian diaspora, what would you recommend us to do to raise awareness outside of Iran and to increase support to people of Iran?
Thank you for the question. As members of the Iranian diaspora, I think we need to appreciate our freedom, living in free countries, and take advantage of it. We are equipped with freedom of expression, which is perhaps the most important right that is taken away from the people of Iran. And when we have access to a voice that is silenced or repressed, we need to elevate that voice and create new audiences that are willing to hear it. What that means is that we should come out of our own silos of speaking to people that we're comfortable talking to. And we need to reach out to the other side of across partisanship and talk to others that we would not normally be familiar with, and tell them the stories of people who need to be heard. And we need to set an example, beginning with ourselves, with engagement, with listening, and with dialogue, and we're not knowing that we're not always going to agree with people who are different from us politically. And we have to understand that they have been hearing a completely different narrative for decades. And we slowly, with honesty, with facts, and there's plenty of facts, and there are documented facts and videos, and we need to show the reality to others, to new audiences. I hope that's sufficient.
That's great, and it's also good advice for our country as well, to be reaching across and talking to people. So thank you. Arash, this next one is for you. What can we expect from the Iranian democratic movement for the next 4 years under a Biden administration?
Well, that's a tough one, because we really don't know how Biden administration is going to deal with the Iranian regime. And I'm not good at predictions. We are hoping that Biden doesn't repeat the same mistakes that President Obama did in trying to ignore the people and having the dialogue with the regime, in the hope that there's going to be change within the regime. One thing that's very important for all of us to understand outside of Iran, who are kind of hopeful with JCPOA or any negotiations or any talks that's happening, the reason they fail is because this is a corrupt mafia regime that's controlling the wealth of a nation, has occupied this country, is controlling the wealth. They will never engage in free market. They will never engage in something that requires transparency. Therefore, there will never be a deal where you can have Apple go and invest in Iran and have a factory or whatever. So that's never going to happen, because the minute the international companies want to have a foot in Iran, there needs to be transparency. If there's transparency, then you will see that's only like 10 or 12 families controlling the whole wealth of this country. So that's never going to happen with any administration, Biden, Trump, Obama. There's no deal that's good for the people of Iran. There's no good deal that will bring change to Middle East. So I hope President-elect Biden and his advisors have a more realistic approach. And if they do, then I think it's up to us to show, to show how much people in Iran want change. One thing I just want to quickly add, I know we're running out of time. 41 years of oppression. You have a country that's being ruled by a guy who's for the last 32 years hasn't done one single interview with any media. So, I mean, I think they need to embrace this fact that there's never going to be any reform or any change in Iran through negotiations. And the only way, as Kamaran said, is to support the democratic movement of the people with internet, with media, with supports like what happened for Navid. Just push and stop this violence that the regime is imposing on the people.
Thank you so much. Cameron, I'll turn this question to you. What is the status of the relationship between China and Iran?
Well, it's a very good question. China has been, first of all, I should preface this by saying by no means am I an expert on China, so I'll try to keep my comments general. In fact, there are some similarities between China and the Islamic Republic in terms of the absolute denial of civil and human rights to many of their people. Of course, the Islamic Republic is, many times worse than what you see in China on any scale, economic, human rights, anything. What China has done recently, perhaps the question is referring to a recently signed 25-year deal between the Chinese Communist Party and the Islamic Republic. And one thing I'll just add here is, we've learned increasingly recently, words do matter. So this is not a deal between China and Iran. Iran implies the Iranian nation, the Iranian people. This is a deal between the Chinese Communist Party and the Islamic Republic. So the Iranian people had nothing to do with this deal. This was imposed on them and they have no say whatsoever. Basically what it did is a complete violation of Iranian sovereignty. It's more stealing of Iranian wealth. They sold off basically access to the Persian Gulf and potentially even a military base on Iranian soil. It's similar to what the Islamic Republic did previously a year or so ago with the Caspian Sea. Iran's beautiful and historic Caspian Sea was sold off to the Russians because this Islamic Republic is not focused on getting food or money or medical equipment to the people. It's focused on itself. And so it frequently signs these sham deals to basically sell off parts of the country. There was even discussion of selling off actually part of Iran's historic Damolam mountain to a religious foundation. I mean, they were literally auctioning off mountains and selling them to give money for the regime. So it's really a shameful situation. I'll add one brief point is this is another narrative you see in the West by this sort of apologist for the regime crowd was, well, we didn't follow through on the JCPOA and therefore now the Islamic Republic or Iran is doing deals with China and that's a lost opportunity. That is completely false. The Chinese Communist Party is imposing itself on a weak state, on a weak regime because they know they need money. I think what's actually more interesting is thinking of Iran's future. I mean, Iran is a country of 85 million extremely well-educated, Western-loving, freedom-loving people, which could really be a center for global commerce, for global tourism, at the heart of the intersection of Asia, Africa, Europe. I mean, it really could be something amazing. In fact, independent economic statistics show that before the Islamic Revolution, Iran's economy should have surpassed that of West Germany, of Japan, of South Korea. So Iran could really be a global powerhouse had the revolution not happened. And once the Islamic Republic falls, which it will soon, it can be again.
Thank you so much. Marjan, I'll do this one to you, and then it'll probably be our final question. How do you see the role of ethnic liberation movements among the various non-Farsi ethnicities, Arab, Kurdish, Azeri, Baloch, etc.?
So the ethnic communities in Iran are all part of Iran. The ethnic regions on the borders of Iran, they are all part of Iran. People speak different languages, people dress differently, people have different cultures in the regions that you named, the Kurds, the Baluchis, the Arabs, the Lurs, the Azerbaijanis, others, they're all part of Iran. And the Iranian people are very, very patriotic people, and the sanctity of the Iranian geography and Iranian borders is very important to all of the Iranians. Iran will not be an Iran without, its Kurdish people, without its Baluchi people, and so on and so forth. So what is happening, and there are some rumors about separatism and other, side activities are stemming from the fact that these regions and these populations have been systematically neglected by the regime over the past several decades. And as a result of this systematic neglect, there is a significant amount of frustration, poverty. These regions are suffering from a disproportionate rate of unemployment and poverty, and there is no recourse, there is no representation, there is no hope for betterment. So when these people are rising up naturally to demand for justice and for what they deserve to receive, and for, again, it goes back to dignity, but they are repressed. The typical charge that is imposed on Iran's ethnic minorities is a charge of national security and separatism, which again is a complete fabrication. It is intended to just divide people further. So there, in terms of the role for ethnic communities in the overall civic engagement of the Iranians is unity. The best role is unity, is collaboration, because their pain in Baluchistan is the same pain in Kurdistan. The pain in Lorestan is the same pain in the Arab regions. So the most important role is unity, and is dispelling these rumors of separatism and division that the regime unfortunately is encouraging.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. I wish we had more time, but Lisa, I'm going to turn this conversation back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all your wonderful questions to the audience and to our panelists. They each come with such a wealth of knowledge to educate others, to be a voice, to be a vessel, to be the communicators of the message from the Iranian people. And we invite you all to do the same. You can follow these wonderful panelists on social media. You can engage with them. I also invite you to sign up for my daily top 10 email. You can find that and subscribe on foreigndesknews.com, where I put out the top 10 news stories of the day. It's another way to engage and to become educated. And as you heard here today, knowledge is the #1 resource that we can all have in order to reach over, in order to communicate with people who don't share our point of view, and in order to push back on the mainstream media, on the voices that are controlling this narrative. And you heard a different perspective today, the narrative that comes straight from the mouths of those who are in touch with the people of Iran. They're telling us their story, they're telling us their history, and they're telling us where they want to take this in the future. Thank you for joining us, and I wish you all a wonderful day.
Thank you to Lisa and Cameron, Arash and Marjan for such an important and timely discussion. We have to have you all back. And thank you, Lisa, for giving all those great resources so our audiences can continue to learn. Thank you so very much. For those of our viewers who have appreciated today's program, please text the word GIVE to the phone number on the screen. We can't do this without you, and we need your support. So thank you so much. We have some terrific programs coming up that I'll just briefly let you know about. Tomorrow, Politics in the Time of Coronavirus with politics professor Dan Schnur. On December 1st, we have U.S. relations with Japan and Korea. On December 8th, our young professionals are putting on a program focused on our international organizations becoming obsolete. We also have California Congressman Karen Bass, who is on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, on December 15th. and on December 9th, a wellness seminar with the Chicago School of Professional Psychology in terms of the psychological impact of the COVID pandemic. So please, if you would like to register for these events, right now our website is down. We have two options. When you get an email blast from us, just click on the link or call our office directly and we'll help you out. So everybody, please stay informed, stay tuned, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you so much.